In a world where Twitter leads the headlines and the 24-hour news cycle forces people to choose sides, we're here to help you cut through the noise and discover that the truth lies somewhere in the middle. Hosted by entrepreneur, author, public speaker, and regular media contributor Seth Denson. Subscribe, share, rank, and review. Welcome to Somewhere in the Middle on the Real News Communication Network.
Zach, I gotta tell you, man, post July 4th, I'm feeling it.
Yeah, you're feeling it?
I'm feeling it, but not in the fun way.
No,
you know, listen, it's 150 degrees outside here in Texas.
Oh, sure,
right now,
it's warm.
And I choose July 4th week to get a cold. So, congratulations to everybody in the booth with me here today. You all now are getting to experience the lovely chill of a Texas winter. Right,
it's awfully cozy here in the control room.
You know, we used to always talk about July 5th being official hangover day.
Yeah,
at least that's what I was told. I've never really experienced that, but for me, it was a little bit different. It was just fighting through the fact I knew something was wrong when I'm sitting there outside with my kids, and I am freezing. Like, I've got chills going. Something is not right. So we're gonna fight through it though.
Okay.
Right? We're gonna battle through today. I'm on the low end, guys. I've been on antibiotics now for more than 48 hours. We're gonna be okay.
Yeah.
You might clean the microphone afterwards. We'll just
we got wipes. It's fine.
There you go.
We got a
Very
spray.
good.
We can. Yeah, it'll be great.
This is Somewhere in the Middle. This is episode 3. Beautiful day outside today. I am joined as always by the great Zach Lewis. Zach.
Thanks.
How are you, buddy?
I'm doing all right. Not having a cold, so pretty good, I guess. Yeah, in perspective.
I'm on the tail end of it. We'll keep drinking the water. But if I get that awkward cough in the middle of the show, we know why. So
we'll edit that out.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, we'll take care of it.
Appreciate that. You know what? So I'm excited about today's show, and it should be a little similar to everybody.
Yeah.
We had a lot of great feedback from yesterday's show.
It was a good show.
Or last week's show.
Yeah.
See, I'm already in the mental thing. It's just not. We're not
Keep
firing
together,
all
man. Come on.
cylinders today. But listen. So what we're going to take on today: does the closed primary system in the U.S. ensure that we have extreme versus moderate governments? Should be an exciting topic. It is actually posed to me by a listener. We have more listeners than my mom, apparently.
Really?
Because somebody asked what we thought about the open versus closed primary system and how the government works as a result. And obviously, this is on the heels of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in New York's 14th district.
Yeah.
Winning and beating I think it was a 5-time incumbent congressman up there. So we'll talk about that. And then we want to talk about protesting, right? Protesting, it's an everyday occurrence these days. Somebody's protesting something. And does it really have an impact anymore? I want to bring that up. And to take on those topics today, my mom used to have a saying, if you've got a recipe that the masses love, you just throw a little bit more butter into it and you serve it up again, right? And so with that, I'm excited to bring back to the show Mr. Matt Bowers, the provocateur of thought himself.
Hey, Seth. Thanks for having me, buddy.
Matt, good to have you back, buddy.
Bad, man.
And Scott Snellings, personal injury attorney here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and just an all-around good guy.
Oh, thank you for that. And really, the only reason I come back is to hear these West Texas sayings each week, because you come up with something new, even if you have to alter it.
Right. Well,
even if you have to alter it.
Not usually from my mom. We were talking about that before the show. Mom was pretty good about making sure that everything was clean. Right. But that's a South Carolinian statement.
Oh, okay.
So my mother's from South Carolina. Although she spent most of her life in Texas, she learned to talk, I think, in South Carolina. Yeah. We'll have Mom on the show one day. But anyway, so let's start talking about the primary system, right? So couple statistics. There are 23 states that have open primaries, and for those listeners that don't know, open primary means that you don't have to necessarily vote in the general election the way that you voted in the primary election. So if I voted for the Republican ticket, I can go into the general and vote on the Democratic ticket in an open primary. If it's a closed primary, though, I can. I got to kind of stick with the horse I rode, so to speak, even if I didn't ride the horse that ultimately got the nomination. But in today's climate, with such a low overall turnout within the voting masses. I think as a society in the U.S., we're averaging just below 40% voter turnout. There are 23 states that have open primaries. Okay, of those, 16 are Republican-held states. But does the closed primary system ensure that we have an extreme level of government running the system? In other words, if the majority of Americans are like we are in this room, somewhere in the middle, are we ensuring that the government itself is not in the middle because of how the primary system works? Guys, what do you guys think about this?
Yeah, I think that there's something to that for sure. I'm not the biggest fan of open primaries.
Really?
Yeah, I'm not, just because of the ability for one party to manipulate an outcome that they would like to see. You mentioned earlier when we were talking how Rush Limbaugh at one point was, kind of urging Republican voters to go vote for, I guess, Obama over Hillary. He thought that would give Republicans a better chance to win. And
didn't work out so well.
Yeah. But, at the end of the day, it kind of goes against the spirit again of what we're really trying to get to here, which is the people electing the people that they truly believe are going to represent their interest. And what ends up happening when you have an open primary like that is quite often people are voting to try to manipulate the system rather than voting for what their heart or what their mind's telling them is best for them and their other folks in their area or district,
Yeah, but if it's a closed primary, I'll play a little devil's advocate here. If it's a closed primary system, and let's say that, let's take this last election, for example. Let's say I'm a never Trumper, right? And I voted for somebody else in the primary, and Trump wins the election, the primary election, and is now the Republican candidate. I'm acting like it didn't happen. This is what happened, guys. Is now the Republican candidate, and I go, there is absolutely never a world where I would vote for Donald Trump, but because of a closed primary system, I now cannot go vote for Hillary or anybody else for that matter. Again, we live in Texas, so we have the right. It's one of the 23 states that allows us to change our minds based on the overall outcome of the primaries. But to your point, Matt, does that not just now pigeonhole me, and does that keep me from wanting to vote in a primary so that instead I can make sure I get to vote in the general if the primary doesn't go the way I want it to?
Yeah, it does. It definitely does. Like with any system, there's things we like and things we don't like about it. I'm going to lean towards the fact that at least in our current world, most people are going to vote along party lines, I believe. And so I think it would be a rare Republican that would look at that and say, I'm not going to support the Republican nominee. I mean, we're seeing that now with Trump. I mean, there are people, I wonder what Trump would have to do. How bad would it have to get for his base to turn on him or turn against him? Now there are those people in the middle that end up, like you and I have voted both ways over the years, that end up kind of pigeonholed on that. So I'm not sure what the solution would be to that.
Yeah, Scott, what do you think?
Yeah, I think the closed primaries really change the direction of the election, right? The closed primaries, say a Democratic primary, you're going to have Democrats fighting to get further left than they would if this was an open primary, because in an open primary, they're trying to appeal to more people, right, as opposed to just their base. And I think that whenever you have a closed primary, you're going to see things go further left and left and left, or right and right and right if it's a closed primary red state.
But and that's the way it used to work, right? I mean, we used to always see candidates kind of move to the extremes. They'd go way left or way right, but ultimately govern from the middle when push came to shove, right? Bush 43 is a great example of that, right? Ran on a lot of issues that were positive to conservative voters, but by the time he was done governing after his 8 years, there were a lot of people calling him a rhino, a Republican in name only, which that's a whole show in and of itself. As someone who identifies, this is the first time I'm saying this on this show, probably more as a Republican than I would a Democrat. I consider myself a free-thinking American, and I am not, to your point, Matt, earlier in that, and even yours, Scott, I'm not loyal to a party. I'm loyal to my country. And I want to have the right or the ability that if I think a candidate in a primary election is going to be the best for the country, but that candidate ultimately does not become the nominee of my party, or the party that I voted in their primary. I want to have the ability to listen to the debates openly, to hear what their positions are, and make a decision on that. And I think, unfortunately, what we're seeing today is this movement of such an extreme base that votes that the candidate that comes out of our primary is not somebody typically that's going to govern from the middle or listen to all parts. They're going to try to continue to pander to their base to keep everybody in line. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I agree. When we look at what Trump has done with his base and his rhetoric in the beginning, we were laughing earlier. Quite often, we'll hear Trump come out and say something that is not very traditionally Republican, like he was saying.
He got after Pfizer today, I think, for overcharging Americans at home and then dropping prices overseas. And so he said, basically, we're not going to allow that to continue to happen. Well, that's not a traditional Republican platform.
It sounds almost like something Bernie Sanders might say, quite honestly. But we'll see, if we track that over the next week or so, we'll see that probably Trump has gotten some feedback from the Republican Party, and he'll start to backpedal on that. Same thing happened with the when they were talking about how to better manage immigration or gun control.
Yeah,
he was very liberal sounding on gun control. His first couple of things that he spoke out or tweeted about. And then over time, we saw him begin to backtrack on that. And he was really against the NRA and some of that stuff and some of that rhetoric he was putting out. I think in those instances, we're getting Trump's heartfelt feelings about these things, and he's pulled back by his own party,
Yeah.
And so I feel like we're this divide that we have that is separating us out in this way is much bigger than our primary system.
It is, but so to that point, we talk about Trump and how he's kind of pandering to the base and structured there from a primary perspective. I also found it interesting from the left perspective, and we mentioned her name earlier, the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I think is how you pronounce it. I may have messed it up. She's in the 14th congressional district in upstate New York. 11% of the voters turn out, and she won 57% of that 11%. Her big platform, she's a self-described socialist, and her big platform was the abolishment of ICE. Right? That was her bullet point. That was her thing. And of course, with everything going on with immigration right now, it was a hot topic of the day, and it was timing all the planets aligned, right? But what was interesting was the week before that primary election, Schumer and Pelosi both were out saying, no, we're not in favor of abolishing ICE. ICE has a role in Homeland Security. We need to have better immigration policies, but abolishing an organization like ICE is not what we're trying to do. Fast forward a week, Cortez wins the election, the primary, with 11% of the vote. I'm going to restate that. 11% turnout, I should say. 11% turnout of the eligible voters. And what happens the next day? Both Schumer and Pelosi are out there. We got to get rid of ICE. We got to drop it. So this idea that these extremes are owning the narrative because they're showing up, is that not something we need to have a discussion about and say, are we being governed by the extremes because of how the primary system works?
Well, and too, Seth, it's not just those people. It's the potential presidential. The people who are going to be running for president in the Democratic race in 2020. You have Gillibrand, you have Warren, you have Kamala Harris. All of them came out and said, "Hey, abolish ICE too." Harris said, "We need to reform it, not all out abolish it." But it's not just Congress.
Right.
It's bigger than that, man.
Yeah. Matt, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that this isn't anything new. We saw back in, what was that, 2008, when Ron Paul was a very popular candidate for the Republicans. He was talking about abolishing the Department of Energy, the Department of, or the EPA, a bunch of other stuff. No Republican had ever talked about that before that I ever knew of.
Right.
But they saw all the crowd showing up for Ron Paul, and so we have Rick Perry in the famous debate. Sitting here just ripping off.
What's the other one?
Well, oddly enough, the one he couldn't remember was the one he now has, the Department of Energy.
Your best gaffe.
So, this isn't new. Politicians, put their finger in the wind all the time to see which way the wind's blowing, and it's a very copycat league, kind of like the NFL. So, if something's working, it's getting traction. Like you said, we'll start to understand better what they're really thinking or what they're really feeling when they win or when they get into office and how they actually govern. And most of the time they end up governing somewhere in the middle, but we may see a departure from that. We may start to see candidates, like I mentioned last week about Trump, who just is still running for office, it feels like,
right.
And I think that's whether they like him or not, that's getting noticed. And it's getting noticed by Democrats, and they're going, you know what, maybe we need to listen to crazy old Bernie Sanders. He's filling up stadiums when Santorum or whoever couldn't even fill up a teacher's lounge, And
I think that, though, again, I'm going to go back to this. I think that this is when we start to get a little scary, right? Because I can always rally the people who may be passionate about what I believe. There's enough people out there to do that. We'll talk about protesting in the next segment. I think that there's, that we can draw that line there. But that doesn't, just because I can fill up a football stadium with a bunch of people who are hard-lined on one topic, doesn't mean that is reflective of the masses. But that's what plays. That's what plays on social media. And another interesting thing, and I don't know how you guys vote, but Matt, you mentioned earlier straight party line ticket voting.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I think that is absolutely wrong. So if you are going into the voting booth and say, you know what, I'm going to vote just the Republican ticket and I'm going to check that first box at the top and call it a day, shame on you.
Yeah.
Shame on you.
Yep.
If I don't know the candidates in a certain on the ballot for a certain race, judicial district, whatever, I just don't vote on that one.
Right.
Because I don't want to cancel out somebody else's vote who's taken the time to understand the issues, to address them, and it is passionately voting for someone specifically. All I'm doing at that point is just canceling out that vote with I don't know the issues, I don't know who I'm voting for. And so one of the things that I'd like to see, again, far-fetched that it would ever happen, is this elimination of the ability to do a straight party line ticket. I think if you want to vote for the Republican candidate, you need to take the time and check the box.
Yep.
Not just check the box at the top. Thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I can't tell you, I live in Collin County, vote in Collin County, and there's lists going around all the time. Hey, here's who the Tea Party supports. And I guarantee you people walk in there, they've made their notes on that list, and they just go through and tick, 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 tick in the primaries. And because in Collin County, quite frankly, at this point in time, the primary is pretty much the real election.
Right.
Certainly for local offices. And so,
for those of you that don't know, Collin County is one of the most conservative counties in Texas.
Yep.
Actually, making it one of the most conservative counties in the country.
That's right.
So,
and I'm the guy who has a personal injury law firm based right there. Right.
Good for you.
No, and so what about taking it a step further and taking the R and the D off the ballot altogether?
So
how about that?
You just hit on my second note, right? So interestingly enough, a lot of city government elections now no longer allow the city councilman candidates. I think Dallas, they removed that a few years back, where you can't say if you're a Republican or Democrat on the ballot. It's, I'm just Seth Denson.
Running for office.
That's right.
Yep.
I'm running for. I'm not running for city council in Dallas, by the way. That was not an announcement, Zach.
Cut that
Just
out.
county commissioner.
I don't even live in Dallas, right? So I'm in a suburb. I can't run. But you can't. You're not running as a political party candidate. You're running as yourself. What are your thoughts on that? Boy, what would we see in the world if we saw that happen?
I love that idea. More of that, please. Less party politics and more people representing the people. One of our biggest issues right now is party politics. Mm-hmm. So anything we could do to move away from that would be, I think, extremely beneficial to us right now. But what we end up with is this, the two sides with all their media input into our brains each day, and people being completely manipulated into kind of groupthink. Right. As opposed to individual thought. On Independence Day, I posted on Facebook, I think I saw you liked it. I said, on Independence Day, let's remember to think independently. Mm-hmm. And independent thought founded this country. And the more of that we can do, and the more that we can all start to say, I don't care what party he's with. I like that guy. I like what he's saying. I believe in those things. And the more we can vote our conscience, the more likely we are to end up with better people in office, in my opinion.
Yeah. An interesting thing what California is doing, have you seen this jungle primary structure they've just kind of moved to? I think that's what it's called, where effectively they're saying the top two, it's not so much a political primary as it is just an overall primary, and the top two vote getters end up in the general. So the idea there is that if you have 10 Democrats and one Republican running, you better be careful. The Republican's going to get on the general ballot, and the 10 Democrats could cancel themselves out. But the idea was, hey, listen, we're going to start to change this whole system where it's just this, I'm going in this direction or that direction, and we're all done. I don't know if it'll work. I think that I think it all panned out for the most part in this last primary cycle the way that it would normally would have. But I like to see that states are thinking about this differently and saying, hey, let's get off of this just one hardline party structure, and let's really start getting back to the core of the issues.
And see, in that case, I would be more in favor of an open primary.
Right.
Well, and I wonder, too, if you take the R, the D off the ballot, if that's going to tend to open up candidates to take maybe some different views. Maybe they agree with most of the platforms on the Republicans, but there's some social issues they want to go with the Democrats on. I wonder if that would open them up to do that. I also wonder if it would force voters to educate themselves.
Well, I would hope it would, right? Again, voter turnout's so low already. The majority of those that even do vote and turn out are passionate on maybe one issue,
right?
And they're going straight party line on that issue. And then we end up with things like these different caucuses in Congress. I mean, the Freedom Caucus. Again, I'm gonna frustrate half the people out there that listen to the show probably, but you want to talk about a bunch of petulant children. Let's take the Affordable Care Act, for example, and this is a whole topic. We won't dive into this. But you had the opportunity, which is what you were rallying for the Affordable Care Act to go away, because you got 90% of what you wanted, but not 100% of what you wanted. You shot it down, right? That's not the way our government was supposed to work. It wasn't 100% or nothing. If that were the case, we would never get anything done, which is actually what we're seeing happen right now. And that's how we end up with these extremes.
Well, and you have all the radio talking heads basically saying, don't compromise. We want 100% or we want nothing.
That's right.
And it's across party lines, right? You see the talk show hosts on liberal stations, on conservative stations, on talk radio, and they're all saying the same thing. We want 100% or we're going to throw fits. And that's not how you run a country. I mean, there has to be some kind of compromise, right? You run a business. Is there compromise in your business?
No.
Yeah, okay. All right.
No, always compromise.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, and you have to compromise if you're going to get anywhere. You try to make the compromise in as much your favor as possible. And if things start going your direction because your policies work, okay, then maybe you get more of what you want. Yep. If it's awful, then you know what? They're probably going to take it away from you a little bit. Mm-hmm.
Candidates used to actually run on the platform of being able to go across the aisle and work with the other side and get things done. It's the opposite of that now. If you're too much over there working with those other guys, you're the enemy, and we're not voting for you.
That's
again,
right.
You know?
So it's basically give me a majority so I can force through everything I want.
Exactly.
Right?
The idea, the spirit of our government was never to be completely take control of this whole thing, and those guys over there all got to go away, and we'll run everything. It was never meant to be that way. It was meant to be different ideas coming together and meeting somewhere in the middle. You know, we talk a lot about issues like free tuition for college or whatever. You know, well, that may be a bit of an extreme idea of just everybody gets to go to college for free. Well, what if we just came somewhere in the middle of that and said people could get affordable loans for college, not have to go into debt for the first 20 years of their life after college, or they could earn that by doing public service and things. You know, there's all kinds of middle ground that we could be on that topic to reach our final destination, which was having a higher educated group of people that are more employable, you know. But all we hear is socialism and blah, 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 and this is all terrible. There might be somewhere in the middle if we'd all just sit down and put our heads together where we could get to a place that everyone could benefit from, because there's Republican kids and Democrat kids trying to go to college that we could all be thinking about ways to get them there, or trade school or whatever, you know. But we're so busy fighting for our little patch of ground that we never get to a place that might really be mutually beneficial for everyone. And I think name calling is a big part of that. hate that, all the snowflake stuff and all the libtard and all the other crap that we do to each other. Let's stop some of the name calling. Sorry about that.
I think we can. I don't know. What do you think, Seth? Should we call that out?
What were
Your
they calling
mom wouldn't like it.
I need
know.
to have mom on speed dial. Like mom, survey says, mom.
Matt's
X or
cussing
no?
again,
I know.
Mom.
At least you didn't say what they were calling the Tea Partiers, right?
Yeah, but this name calling and divisive stuff so much prevents us from getting things done that might really be beneficial for everyone. Guess what? The other side has good ideas sometimes. Let's hear it out and see if we can work that into something that we can all, like healthcare or whatever, that we can all come together. Yeah, this is what makes sense and this is best for most Americans. But what we're pandering to isn't most Americans.
That's right.
What we're pandering to is who's going to show up and vote. And who shows up to vote are the people that tend to have extreme ideas about this stuff.
Those people that protest. Which
Segue.
brings me to segment 2. Right after the break here, we'll talk about that. Scott, you had a thought?
Yeah, I was just going to say, back when Bill Clinton was governing, you had Dick Morris who came up with the whole triangulation. I don't know if he came up with it, but he's the one that everybody always goes to. And he said basically the theory of triangulation is you take the best ideas from the right on an issue and the best ideas from the left on an issue, and you come up with a solution that's better than either party's solution, right? And so that was kind of the basis of triangulation, and that's dead, right?
It's dead.
That's not what we're doing right now.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
All right. So protesters, do they still have an impact? Are those the people that are ending up at the polls? We'll talk about that. We'll take that one on in segment number 2 of Somewhere in the Middle. Welcome back. Somewhere in the Middle. I am Seth Denson. That's where you're finding yourself today. I am joined by Matt Bowers and Scott Snellings here in studio. Guys, thanks for coming back.
Try not to catch your sickness.
I know, right? And of course, Mr. Zach Lewis, Apple Zackintosh himself, in the booth.
Going?
Being awfully quiet today.
Here's what it is. I got things I want to say, but I know we only have so much time. And I'm afraid I'm going to spin off into somewhere weird because I wanted to talk about having an informed voter base and how we can better inform people. Because you're right. If we don't have a society that's informed, we can't possibly be expected to vote reasonably. We end up in a situation kind of like where we're at now. Yeah. So if we take R&D off the ballot, I'm behind that. But then that makes it harder to vote informed. And that expects more of a culture. And it's a whole other topic. So let's talk about protesting. Yeah, I didn't mean to spin
I'm with you guys. And I think that we could easily take up a whole nother segment on and we will.
Yep.
We'll talk about it again because by no means did we solve the world's problems there. I think we got to get into campaign finance reform, what's going on there. I think there's a lot, to Zach's point, from an information perspective that we need to do differently. But interestingly enough, another week and more protests, right? It kind of continues to be the thing. And it's interesting. So, and I don't know, guys, I want to get your take on this. Is it social media? Because protesting happened when I was a kid, I think. I remember some things around. I think there was some apartheid and some these other national protests that I remember seeing as a kid growing up. Obviously, the protests in L.A. following the Rodney King issues. And these were people that had grievances that we needed to stand up and listen. But now you can't turn on the news without there being somebody protesting something.
Cause du jour.
Yeah. So what do you guys think on this? Is protesting even effective anymore?
Well, I think it depends on what your end result is, right? What are you trying to accomplish? If you're trying to raise awareness, yeah, absolutely. You can get people informed on a specific issue like no other these days with social media. But if you're really trying to accomplish a specific goal, I think there's a lot more to it to determine if it's going to be successful. You've got to be organized. You've got to have a clear message with clear goals. You have to probably have a little money backing. And you got to have people who are really truly engaged in the issue, who are going to put that at the very forefront of what they're living their life for, essentially, and not be afraid of the consequences. And quite frankly, in today's social media age, you have a lot of people who I think are joining protests or are liking protests online so they can feel better about themselves and then move on with their day. And that doesn't do any good.
So, Matt, what do you think?
I think that protests are effective if what you're protesting is worthy of a protest. I personally became involved in a protest, I guess almost 2 years ago now. I'm not a big protester, haven't been before this point in my life. But when the travel ban came down and they were holding people without representation out at DFW Airport, I figured it's right here in my backyard. I knew some lawyers that were out there involved in that were fighting for those folks to be released. And I went out there. I didn't know what I was going to do. I walked up to the lawyer's table and said, hey, I used to run a legal services company. How can I help? Give me some water. I'm like, okay, perfect. I'll do that. It's kind of what I'm qualified
Matt
for.
The water boy.
But hey, whatever
like
it takes, man. But, I was called to action,
Mm-hmm.
And I was reading, Harvard did a study on this very question, whether or not protests have an effect. And what their study found was that they don't always have the effect in the way that you might think. The protests may not get some immediate end result. What it does quite often do is activate people, get people to run for office, not just vote, but to actually run for office and try to affect change. Back in 2008, the Tea Party was basically started as a protest. Mm-hmm. They did those tax day protests, and those were huge, got a lot of attention. Well, some of those guys decided to run for office. And they were not the favorites of the Republican Party by any stretch. They ran for office locally. They won. They won House seats. They won Senate seats. These guys became a powerful movement in the Republican Party. We're seeing that happen now on the other side of the aisle a little bit more, where we're seeing a lot of these folks that are considered far left are the ones out doing the protesting. They have a lot of these ideas that younger voters are drawn to. So when we look at someone like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she's 28 years old. She will be the youngest woman in Congress if she wins, okay? That's exciting for a lot of people to see what looks like a neighborhood organizer getting involved, don't like what you see, go run for office, And that's what we all always tell people. But then when they do it, well, make sure you agree with us as well, Right. Well, what we're seeing is, a lot of people, Patty Schrackner was a surprise win in Wisconsin. She's a house mom who decided to run for office. She was PO'd about what she saw, ran for office in a very Republican part of the state and won it. Because she's just resonating with people, telling her truth. She doesn't take big money from super PACs and things of that nature. So I'm seeing, from both sides of the aisle, that people are kind of wanting this representative of the people. They're kind of turned off by career politicians. They like outside the Beltway. Both of these sides of this, both wings of this bird are kind of wanting the same thing, which is actually true representation by people from our community, not some guy that lives somewhere else but is running for office, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I see where you're going with that, Matt, and I agree with you. Mm-hmm. But from a protesting perspective, I'm always intrigued to have. I think Fox has Waters World. Jesse Waters, I think is his name. He's a reporter that goes out to these protests constantly. And he's asking people kind of on the topics, what do you believe? And half the people they interview, and of course that may just be the people they obviously choose to air on the show, have no clue really what they're protesting. They're really uninformed. And I think that the challenge that we have here, and I will tell you, me personally, I turn on half these things and I go, there they are again. Just people that don't have a true voice, because it's almost like the boycott thing. We're so quick to boycott, right? That boycotting to me just doesn't have the impact that it used to. And I think what we run the fear of, or the challenge or perspective is that protesting, does it have the impact that it used to have? Does it?
I don't think so. I mean, you look at the civil rights protests, you look at Vietnam War protests. I mean, those were large-scale protests that accomplished things, quite frankly. When's the last time a protest on our shores has really accomplished much of anything other than bringing awareness, maybe raising up some people that run from office.
Well, I can tell you,
office.
we went out to the airport and protested. Those people were released that evening.
Yeah.
They were not going to be. Just recently, we saw the president enact his zero tolerance.
That's right.
He said there was nothing he could do about it. It was up to the Democrats to actually change anything, is what he actually said.
Mm-hmm.
But we saw as the fervor went up, I saw you had a great post about that, Seth. Hey, I'm a Republican, but I don't like this. When people start speaking up and saying, what you're doing here is not okay in enough numbers, what happened? Okay, let's stop that for now. And again, there may be rhetoric, but at least for a minute, it seemed to have an effect.
Right.
And we see people lose jobs. We see people, get in some tough situations.
I think what makes that
over
one different is it appealed to so many more people, right? It wasn't just a liberal cause. You had conservatives come out in droves saying, this isn't right.
That's right.
We shouldn't be separating children from their families.
So that's kind of what I was saying in the beginning, is that if it's a worthy enough cause, if what you're protesting is not all slanted towards your viewpoints, but just is a matter of what's right and what's wrong, like holding those people at the DFW airport who were traveling legally without representation was not okay.
Right.
That's why I went.
Sure.
Not because I've leaned left or leaned right. I just heard about it, not okay, not cool, did a little research on it to figure out, and my butt was out there protesting.
But, to your point, Matt, and I'm glad you brought up the no tolerance thing, because I agree. That was one of those areas, and listen, I stood up on that one and said, hey, guys, I got an opinion on this. I think what's happening is wrong, and here's why. But the challenge is, or the thing that I fear from this, is it's less, maybe this is a topic for the next show, it's less about winning, and it's more about the other guy losing. And what I mean by that is, those of us that stood up on the no tolerance policy thing, and didn't say, hey, we were all one way or the other, but this is the problem that we have with this. It worked, to your point, Matt. But guess what? We're still protesting it. Right? And so I think what you have the challenge you have here is that at some point, if you just keep pressing, right, even after you get part of what you want, you start to lose some of the your ability to persuade.
Energy.
That's right. That's exactly right. Well, listen, guys, I know we went long on the first segment, but that was good. Second segment, we could probably bring this one up again. I don't think we're going to have people stop protesting, so we could probably bring this one up again. Big thanks, all the folks here at Real News Communication Network that helped make this one happen. As always, Zach, buddy, thank you.
Thanks.
You're the best.
Yeah.
Appreciate you, man.
Likewise.
Always, I know it's sappy, but guys, I always thank my wonderful wife, Jenna, and my beautiful girls, Emerson and Arabella. My passion for this is because of them. So I would be remiss if I didn't thank them. A special thanks to my guests here, Scott Snellings. Scott, where can they find you?
At Scott Snellings or snellingsinjurylaw.com.
And Mr. Matt Bowers.
MyDynamic1 with the number 1.com.
Awesome. Thanks, guys, for being on 2 weeks in a row, right?
Love it.
It was good. Listen, if you're out there and you're listening, do us a favor. Go subscribe to the podcast, rate us, review us, like us, and share us. I made a comment the other day. If you agree with what we say, share it. If you don't agree with what we said, share it. That's right. But ranking us and review us, that's what's going to help us kind of move up in the rankings so we can have more conversations not like this. It's not an extreme position, right?
That's right.
We're meeting somewhere in the middle here. If you have a topic you want us to take on the show, feel free to tweet me at Seth Denson, or you can go and find us on Facebook at Seth Denson Show, or you can email us at sethdensonshow@gmail.com, and we'll take up your topic and love to hear what you have to say. Want to know what my thoughts are on this whole protesting thing?
Let's hear them.
So I may be considering a number of things, but I do know where I land on this. Last week, as we celebrated Independence Day here in the U.S., we saw fireworks, flags, parades, and yes, protesters. Now, protesting is as American as apple pie. Point of fact, protesting is actually in our cultural DNA. December of 1773 saw a group of frustrated colonists protesting taxation without representation, and the way they protested was by dressing up as Native Americans and throwing a ton of tea into the Boston Harbor. From time to time, protesting is necessary, and it is a mechanism that allows us to be heard and make known our collective grievances. However, I do wonder that in the age of social media and 15 seconds of fame, if protesting has just become our new way of auditioning for American Idol, the political reality show version. This past week, for example, we saw a woman climb part of the Statue of Liberty and refuse to come down. She said she wanted to bring attention to the separation of children from their families when caught crossing the border. And herein lies the problem. She wanted to bring attention to an issue that has been playing out across every major and minor media outlet nonstop for the past few weeks. This has been seen as a discussion on even our show just 2 weeks ago. This issue does not need more attention. It needs answers. It needs legislation. It needs action. And it needs expediency to get something done. But speed may be the biggest problem when it comes to protesting these days. In today's world, a call to arms is easy to amass because we can just start a Twitter hashtag or a YouTube video gone viral. We've got our cause, and we arrange for tens of thousands of people to show up at a predetermined location bearing signs and loud voices, and then they go home. Great. You showed up, but now what? Zeynep Tufekci, I did it right.
Nice.
He's a fellow at the Center for IT Policy at Princeton University. He's a fellow there. He writes that before the internet, the tedious work of organizing was that it required those to circumvent censorship or organize a protest. It also helped build infrastructure for decision-making and strategies for sustaining momentum. Now movements can run past that step, often to their own detriment. And this was evidenced recently when Black Lives Matter blocked off freeways earlier this year. The decision makers and legislators weren't there. They were in the Capitol building, unaffected personally by what Black Lives Matter was doing. Who was there? We were there. We were there. All the locals that are now agitated because we're late to work or late to pick up our kids or perhaps wasting one of our only days off from a 6-day grind. We were the ones that ended up frustrated. So with regards to the groups protesting at the Statue of Liberty with a sign that said, "Abolish ICE," sure, for 10 seconds you have the world's attention, but where are the rest of your bullet points? What is step 2? What are your plans for checking foreign cargo that comes into the U.S.? And how about the massive collaboration with the Department of Homeland Security and U.S. Customs Agency that ICE is responsible for to inspect that and ensure that cargo and people and material coming to the U.S. is safe from threat? And this is, of course, ignoring the fact that ICE really wasn't the ones responsible for separating families at the border. That was the U.S. Border Patrol. You're literally angry at the wrong agency. Protests like this really aren't good for making me take you seriously. Not to beat a dead horse, but continuing on the immigration issue, a few weeks ago, many Americans rallied against the U.S. government's no-tolerance policy when it came to separating immigrant families. I was included as one of those voices, and our voices were heard. The government has stopped separating families. But you wouldn't realize that by watching the continued protesting. Sure, I get that we have a long way to go, and the whole immigration issue is still out there, and there are still families yet to be reunited. But when we protest and are heard, yet continue to protest, we quickly devalue the impact of our voice. It's like my 2-year-old who screams that she wants something, and in an effort to just kind of quiet her down, I'll give in. But if she keeps screaming after the fact, I'm likely not going to give in the next time and give her the attention that she ultimately wants, because I just end up annoyed either way. We have accomplished great things as a result of protesting. Desegregation of schools, women and minorities' right to vote, the end of the Vietnam War, all were large in part to protesting with one voice for the need for change. The hashtag #MeToo movement has done amazing things surrounding women's rights and the rights of equality. Black Lives Matter has brought a real conversation surrounding race in this country. But what these groups, along with today's protesters, are in jeopardy of is finding themselves appearing more like petulant children than those without or with a cause and a real mission for change. And just like the annoying kid, we will likely brush them aside, and the cause they so passionately advocated for will become an afterthought and almost a joke that no one lends any credibility to. You don't believe me? When was the last time you heard Occupy Wall Street mentioned, or any of their accomplishments when it comes to how corporations are regulated? there weren't any. We're so hell-bent on having our voices heard, we don't really care about our cause as much as we do our noise. And one last note on how one might protest, and this is for both the Hollywood elitists on the left and those gun-toting Second Amendment folks on the right. Who are you wanting to hear you? Last week we talked about listening more, and I'd like to extend that offer again. Let's listen to both sides and take the time to process and think more about what we want to accomplish than what we want to say. Those are two different things, because right now we're talking and very few are listening. And that's particularly because we don't often send out our best and most persuasive to do our protesting. Instead, we send out Cousin Eddie and his 6-shooter and long rifle, or Cousin Willow, who hasn't combed her hair or showered in the past 3 weeks, to take up the microphone and opine as to why I should think more like them. You want to convince me? Convince me you're not crazy first. And convince me you've got more than a one-size-fits-all answer. Finding myself somewhere in the middle. I'm Seth Denson.
You're listening to RNCN, the digital destination for premium talk radio.